Hello everyone, I am Prachi and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I can see a few people trying to log in, so we'll just give them a few seconds to set themselves up. And I hope you're all well and keeping safe. Now, today's session is about GPT-3, which is the latest game changer in NLP. Now, last year has been a very busy year for AI/ML, the global pandemic notwithstanding. Now, all industries experienced accelerated growth as organizations began to prioritize artificial intelligence solutions that unlock the full value of their unstructured language data. And the latest revolution in NLP is GPT-3. We will be elaborating on the capabilities of GPT-3 shortly. And before we start that, for those that are joining us for the first time, Walking Tree is a technology-focused company with a core focus on designing and building cross-platform web and mobile applications, perform system integrations, and enable digital transformations. We also specialize in data integration, data analytics, migration from legacy to modern systems, cloud migrations, and UX design. Now, in addition to end-to-end application development, we also provide custom solutions to enterprises for web and mobile. Very specific services within the software development lifecycle, UI, UX design, microservices, DevOps, and cloud. We also have a very flexible staff augmentation services which provide our clients with on-demand skills and resources that helps them meet organizational goals and business objectives. Now that you know a little about us, moving on to our speakers, we have Scott Seabold, who is our CTO and comes with an experience of over 30 years in all phases of software development lifecycle, including product ideation, design, development, testing, implementation, and operations support. He has also been helping our clients incorporate AI/ML in their business strategy for accelerated global growth. Then we have Abhilasha Sinha, who has a total experience of 16 years. And her core strength lies in designing and building complex cross-platform applications using Angular, React, and Flutter. She has also been working with our clients to harness the power of AI/ML to exceed their business goals. Then we have Shubham, who has been with us for the last 4 years. His core strength lies in DevOps, analytics, AI, and machine learning. He has been instrumental in helping our clients transform their businesses using AI/ML and has helped them embrace innovation at a competitive pace. Now that you know a little about us and our speakers, please know that we will be fielding your questions at the end of our discussions. Please leave your questions in the Q&A box only. I can see a number of people have logged in, so we can start with our main agenda. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Prachi.
So we have been hearing a lot about the powerful capabilities of GPT-3 recently. And most people say it is the biggest revolution in AI and that it is going to radically transform how NLP is done. How is that? I mean, could you please give us some context to this and help us with a quick overview of GPT-3?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, GPT-3 definitely has been a game changer. And, kind of like the name insists there, the dash three, there was also a dash one and a dash two, right? So GPT-1 and GPT-3, or GPT-2, and then now we have GPT-3. And it's really, again, it's really the third generation generative pre-trained transformer, and it's developed by OpenAI. Now, if you're like me, a lot of those are kind of big words, generative, pre-trained transformer. So, maybe we take a step back a little bit and look at what some of those are essentially, right? And And I think what it really boils down to is that GPT-3 is a language model, and it's based on the transformer architecture. And essentially, when we think about that transformer architecture, right, the transformer architecture or transformer model is really it's a neural network, and it learns context, and thus it really learns the meaning by tracking relationships in sequential data, and for example, like words in a sentence. So you can supply a sentence, and it's able to learn context based on that data. So it's able to learn the meaning of it, basically. Um, some interesting things about GPT-3 and about where it's come from is just the sheer magnitude of the learning parameters that we currently have. And if we look back at GPT-1, GPT-1 had somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 117 million machine learning parameters. And then GPT-2, they stepped that up to 1.5 billion machine learning parameters. And then to give you some context of current day, like Microsoft's Turing had somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 billion machine learning parameters. And now we take a look at it. Here we are with GPT-3, and we've got, it's a deep learning model with over 175 billion learning parameters. I think we say on our slides here, it's one of the largest existing language models, and I don't know of a bigger one personally. So a very, very big, very, very large, language learning model. And I would have to say that if we're looking at, just simply, what does GPT-3 really do, right? It's kind of in that natural language processing family. And it works by predicting, right, the next, let's call them tokens, for example, the next tokens given by a sequence of tokens. So it can take and learn that via natural language processing. So, and we're going to see examples later on in our presentation, but this pre-trained model that we're speaking of was trained with somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 terabytes of text data from all different data sets across the web. So tremendous amounts of data is used to get this pre-trained model. And it really, the beauty of it is it requires a small amount of input text, as we'll see later, and really just just very few words that you can type in and generate really large volumes of relevant and really sophisticated text. So we even see things like poems being written in with GPT-3. And along those lines, there are really a tremendous amount of apps that have already adopted GPT-3, and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 apps is what from what I can see. And it really runs the gamut, right, from anything from productivity to education. So in the academia space, creativity, you'll see GPT-3 fiction out there. So just really some crazy things going on in that the creativity space. And, there's already some adopters out there that are creating resumes and all kind of other things. And we see it in the gaming industry as well. So really just a lot going on in that space. And, essentially it's really a game changer in my opinion, in the natural language processing space.
Wow, that sounds really impressive. But how does it really work? I mean, what are its exact capabilities? Is it one model, two models, or is it an ensemble? Abhilasha, could you please throw some light on that?
Sure, Prachi. So if I have to speak about like first, when we look at the OpenAI family of models, so we have these three categories, the GPT-3, which we are discussing today. Then we have two other categories, which is codex and content filter. Codex is used to generate code, and like you won't believe, like it's in the beta version, but then there is a whole lot of programming languages which it generates. The content filter, again, a very interesting model. So it will give a ranking of the data, whether it is a sensitive or unsafe data. So again, that could be a very useful family. But coming back to GPT-3 models, so here we have like the four uh, models under GPT-3, which are namely like Da Vinci, Curie, Babbage, and Ada. So very interesting names as well. And when we look at the details, so this is actually the hierarchy in which you can say like how well they perform. Da Vinci being the most capable of all, and it can actually process with less instruction compared to the other models, and it is like it can do all the things which the other models can do. So that is the overall capability. And if we talk about the specifics, so be it like understanding the intent of a text, or trying to generate some creative content, or trying to summarize like a huge text. So when you have to process a large amount of text, so this will be a suitable model. Also, when there is any logic involved, like any logic problem or any understanding of cause and effect, so in those kind of things, also Da Vinci is like the more suitable model, and it can take the max number of tokens, which is 4,000, and it is the most updated one also. So June 2021 is the latest training data. Also, like if you look at if you read about GPT-3, so they propose to try out any problem with this model first, and then once you get the results, then try out the other models to see how well they are performing, because this model is slightly on the costlier side. So from the cost perspective, the other models have been more optimized, you can say. So coming to the second one, Curie, again a very powerful and very capable one. It is lower cost than Da Vinci, and it is so the strength of Curie is it is really good for question answer kind of applications like a chatbot, or if for language translations. Again, that is a very useful case for Curie, and it is also used for sentiment analysis. Summarization also is a common use case where both Da Vinci and Curie are used, and it has proved its impact in handling the question answer kind of problems. So it it is trained to handle 2048 tokens. So that is the same number which all the other three models handle. And training is also up to 2019. So because of the the kind of compute power which goes into these models, that's how the cost is determined. So Da Vinci being the most powerful one, and hence there's a lot of computing which goes on into it, and that's the reason the cost is also on the higher side. Whereas Curie and the others, so they actually are optimized to give you a better performance with a like reasonable cost. Anyways, like all the models are quite reasonably costed otherwise. Next, if we talk about Babbage, so Babbage is a simpler model which is suitable for simpler tasks, like more straightforward kind of things like classification, or if you have to do a search ranking. So when a word is searched, so to rank which result is the most suitable match. So that is the semantic search ranking, for which again Babbage is used. And the last one, ADA. So again, ADA is like, yeah, of course, it is the lowest in the ranking if you compare it that way. But then it is a very fast. It is in fact the fastest model, and it is more suitable for the simple, very simple tasks, I can say, like parsing the text or doing some simple classifications, then coming up with correct address correlation and correction of addresses, then based on keywords, doing some like giving some response. So those kind of things we propose to use ADA. So like these are the main models we have under the GPT-3 umbrella, and each one of them is powerful. The higher ones are covering the capability of the lower ones. So Da Vinci, as I already spoke, being the most capable of all.
Wow, it really does look very powerful. So, Abhilasha, could you also throw some light on the kind of applications that are using GPT-3?
Yeah, sure, Prachi. So as we can see, like it is a very powerful NLP capability which GPT-3 is giving us. So with NLP, where we are able to generate language, we are able to process and understand language, and we are able to like generate a lot of content. So accordingly, like the industries to which this can be applied is really limitless. So any industry and every industry will have a use case where this makes sense, because if you talk about the normal thing, so as it is now, more than 300 applications have already been are already using GPT-3. And if you talk from like various industries like in education, gaming, travel, sports, so you name it, and it is useful there, because with GPT-3, you can understand the emotions through sentiment analysis. You can understand your customer reviews more effectively, and like your machine can respond and take necessary actions. You can provide a better customer service by having like very intelligent chatbots which respond and give intelligent answers. And of course, like handling search and other kinds of scenarios where this can be applied to any industry. And in fact, Scott, can you help me with more examples on what use cases we can apply GPT-3?
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. I think, and Prachi, just one thing. I think you've got an application maybe up top. There's a kind of a dark rectangle up top. I think maybe an application is over the current one you have. So, but yeah, if you want to switch to the next slide, Prachi. Yeah, I'll talk about some of those industries a bit. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so there's lots and lots of already adoption, right, for GPT-3 that I mentioned a little earlier. And, you know, some of those we've listed here. And, you know, one case I see, you know, being in manufacturing years ago, one thing I could see is certainly when we're seeing feedback from clients on different products, that maybe you can even look and interpret that maybe you've got a manufacturing issue in your product, and you're able to take that NLP or take GPT-3 and search through that feedback and tell when maybe there's a defect in your product, and you know, recognize those patterns quickly and get them back to the manufacturing floor to take care of. Being a CTO in a company, certainly the software development area and the ability now to really, you know, take natural language and be able to produce code is can definitely be a game changer, and certainly something we're looking at in Walking Tree even, right? So as a CTO, I love the thoughts of some of those tasks, some of those things, even gathering requirements, and can those translate into code somehow, and that kind of possibility. So I see a lot in that space that could really be game changers. You know, taking even the concept of the no code concept to even another level with being able to do NLP and create code from it, right? That would be phenomenal. And then certainly from a marketing perspective, there's having a tool like GPT-3. Not only can you take and gather information from feedback from customers and those kind of things, but also just be able to use certain terminology within the company to generate product descriptions for you. And it really can help scale your marketing needs by, really creating, material that is really high converting type material, right? So being able to generate a lot more material instead of having, 20 writers on your team trying to write all those product descriptions, maybe NLP and maybe GPT-3 here helps us with a lot of that. So helps speed that up. I can see things even in the sports area. I have lots of different sports that I'm interested in. Football, football is an American football, also soccer, which in the US we typically call soccer, right, instead of football. But I like both American football and football abroad. And then I like NASCAR too. So I like car racing and those kind of things, Formula One, IndyCar. And I can certainly see that coming into play where, it can be used to generate sports speech snippets and those kind of things for different media outlets or articles, those kind of things, or also press releases, et cetera. And then the insurance industry, I see this helping out a lot because they can improve customer experience using chatbots, for example. You've got really crazy technical things like underwriting that happen, processing claims. So there's a lot that I see that GPT-3 can be used in that space, in the insurance space. And then in banking, right? So help with more fast and accurate sentiment analysis in the banking sector. So we study customer surveys, we look at social media insights and those type of things. So really, I see a broad ability or broad usage across multiple domains, right? So I think more to come with GPT-3, and then GPT-3 is just the start, right? And again, we looked at, and you just showed over 300 apps already created in this space, and I can see that just growing and growing. So yeah, a lot going on already, and I think a lot more to come as well. So
Wow, that actually looks very promising, to be honest. Although it would be, since GPT-3 is still fairly new, it would be really nice to see, how could it actually work in real life. So Shubham, could you please help us with a demo? It would really, it would really help us understand the real world applications, and we would love to dig deep.
Sure, Prachi. But before that, I would like to request Abhilasha and Scott to talk a little bit more on sentiment analysis. For example, how sentiment analysis can help businesses, different kinds of businesses. I would like them to talk a bit more about sentence generation, conversation assistants, translation, summary cases. So before I demonstrate these use cases, it would be great if the audience has the context as to how each of these, be it sentiment analysis, be it sentence generation, be it conversation, be it translation or summarization, how these are really useful for different kinds of businesses. If Abhilasha and Scott could spend some 10 minutes on it, it would be great.
So I think, and I think that brings up a good point, and I think some of this maybe we need to maybe go into and bring down the language just a little bit, as far as we use things like sentiment analysis, right? And certainly when I think about that, a lot of things pop into my mind in terms of sentiment analysis, but what is it really, right? So maybe we take just a little step back and talk about what sentiment analysis really is. And it's the use of natural language processing, be it like text analysis, computational linguistics, for example, maybe biometrics to systematically identify or maybe extract or quantify data. And really, at the heart of sentiment analysis it's really, if I were to define it, I would say it's like it's really the process of I don't know, computationally identifying and then categorizing, opinions that are expressed in some piece of text, right? So, if we look across not just our industry, right, but across the board, we look at what's going on in the space of Twitter, right? And what is Twitter, for example, right? There's a lot of sentiment analysis that can come from tweets even. So you've got no shortage, worldwide on opinions and people that are expressing those opinions, right? And that sentiment analysis can really help us. We can use that data, I should say, and then use sentiment analysis to help analyze that data and identify and categorize those opinions. So, that applies really, like we talked about, across multiple industries. Certainly marketing is one of them. And I would be quite surprised if we don't see GPT-3 coming up. We're about to hit an election cycle in the US. And I would almost bet you someone's already out there looking and going through and maybe applying that. I don't know that, but hey, if any of you are out there and you're along those lines, I think that's probably a good use case for GPT-3, is using GPT-3 to do sentiment analysis on some of our social media. So that's an example of that, and maybe a little more as far as a definition, if you will, of what sentiment analysis really is. So Abhilash, any other thoughts around sentiment analysis?
Yeah, Scott. So right, as you rightly pointed out, like in this world of social media where there's so much, like everywhere reviews are just coming up, product reviews, claim reviews, policy reviews. So, and everybody wants to hear from their customer, but they are like flooded with information and they don't know how to make sense of all of it. But with the machine being able to process it and quickly generate the essence of it. So when you do a sentiment analysis of a text, it will actually give you the flavor or the like the tempo of the text, which is like whether it's a positive or a negative sentiment, or it could be a neutral one as well. So that would at least give you like a categorization of all the product reviews, for example, and then you can then further drill down and maybe further classify using the classification mechanism on your reviews. So that is really a very useful application of GPT-3, which can be applied to any industry. Secondly, like as this progresses, so when we have these like in the financial sector, where there are some repetitive kinds of jobs like processing income statements, or for example in the claims industry, so the claim so insurance industry, basically the claim documents, the policy documents, so where there is a specific set of documents. So GPT-3 would be very useful there to process and like make, so that will make the overall processing time so much faster. The processing can be done, and then it could assess and tell whether the documentation is complete or how much percentage complete. So these could be other applications of GPT-3.
So
Yeah, I agree.
That's great, Abhilasha. That's great, Abhilasha and Scott. Thanks for that introduction. So I thought it was really important for our audience to understand and appreciate the different kinds of requirements which we may have. And for this, let me start the demo. I'll be sharing my screen.
Sure, thanks, you.
Please give me half a minute.
Okay, so
Yeah,
while okay, we are back.
Sure. Did you want to say something, Prachi?
No, that's okay. It was while we were waiting for the demo to load.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this interactive session on GPT-3. So in this part of the session, not will I be talking about the capabilities of GPT-3, but I'll also be requesting inputs from you, the audience, in terms of different uh, prompts which I provide to GPT-3 to get the required outputs. So this is going to be an interactive session. The next 15 minutes from 9:30 to 9:45 are going to be an interactive session between you and me, and everyone is open to participate. I encourage participation. And from in the last 15 minutes, from 9:45 to 10, we shall have the Q&A session. So as Abhilasha and Scott mentioned, GPT-3 is one of the largest language models in the world today. It is not the largest because after GPT-3, other models have also come. GPT-3 was released around 2020 and it has been 2 years since then. So 2 years is a big span, is a huge span in the domain of NLP. So there is no way GPT-3 could remain the largest model for as long as 2 years. It has been superseded by other models in that context. However, GPT-3 is perhaps the only model, the only large language model, which is used in applications currently, which is used in production applications. As Scott and Abhilasha were referring, there are about 300 applications which are actively using GPT-3. When GPT-3 was released in 2020, around 2020, at that time, the access was severely restricted. So developers had to join a wait list, and after getting approval, they would be allowed to use different GPT-3 models. GPT-3, unlike its predecessors, GPT and GPT-2, was not free of cost. GPT-3 is a charge service. Even now, as I demonstrate you the demo, as we discuss the applications, as we discuss the responses of GPT-3, it's important to note that it's a paid service. However, since last November 2000, so that means November of 2021, what OpenAI did, they removed the waitlist on GPT-3. The waitlist is still there on Codex, as Abhilasha was trying to hint at. So for GPT-3, they removed the waitlist, and developers can simply sign in and get access to GPT-3 and pay as they use. So it's like Amazon or any other cloud. So you pay for what you use. So that made that action by OpenAI, whereby they allowed developers to get quick access to GPT-3 so that they do not have to wait for a real long period of time, essentially allow developers to try this set of models, as Abhilasha was referring to, be it DaVinci, be it Ada, and so on, be it Curie, really fast, build into their applications, integrate into their applications, and then develop awesome, deliver awesome service to their clients. So what are the various use cases for which GPT-3 can be used? Well, somebody mentioned, so I think it was Prachi, that GPT-3 has brought a revolution in the field of AI. Why do we say that? How is it a revolution in the field of AI? How is it a revolution in the field of NLP? If we focus on earlier models, even be transformer models like your BERT model or T5 model or NLG models, these models required training on certain specialized data sets to be able to provide you really good answers. So not that they were not pre-trained models. Of course, they were pre-trained models, like for that matter, GPT-2 and GPT-3. However, in order to be able to use these models for specific requirements, you had to ensure that you gave such inputs to the models which enable them to understand what your requirement is. And those inputs were really long inputs. For example, if you wanted a translation, if you wanted your GPT-2 to translate something from one language to another language, or if you wanted it to be able to answer questions, then you could not simply say to GPT-2 that, hey, translate this from English to French, or translate this from Hindi to English. You would have to give samples to GPT-2 to understand that. Similarly, if you wanted to GPT-2 to be able to answer questions for you, you could simply not say, hey, this is a question and answer it for me. You would have to provide GPT-2 samples, a number of samples. So you would essentially provide a passage followed by a Q&A, followed by a Q&A, and so on, ultimately followed by a queue, so that it recognizes the sequence and it ultimately returns you with an A. So this was something where a good amount of manual intervention was needed. However, that changed drastically with GPT-3. So GPT-3 is a language model where, in order to get certain actions performed, you need not really provide a lot of prompts, provide a lot of inputs. For certain use cases, you would have to, because there are use cases which you may be interested in, which are not common use cases. So something like sentiment analysis is a common use case. Something like translation or sentence generation or conversation with an AI assistant or summarization or completion. These are very, very common use cases. So GPT-3 understands these use cases. You need not explain to GPT-3 how do you do that. However, if you want to give customized instructions to GPT-3, for example, if you see in line 24, if you ask GPT-3 to suggest you 3 names for an animal which is a superhero, that is a superhero, then you need to teach it what do you mean by a superhero and what kind of names you want to get. So, well, in this case, if you give cat as an input, then the names you have to tell GPT-3 that I want names like Captain Sharpclaw, Agent Fluffball, the Incredible Feline, and so on. So similarly for dog. But then GPT-3, as Scott mentioned, doesn't read many prompts either to learn. It needs a very, very small number of prompts and it learns fast. So GPT-3 is like essentially, well, a fresher who is somebody like maybe 20 years old. He has been trained on something for around 20 years. So he has that mind, he has that brain. And once you give small instructions, he will be able to learn it very quickly and do that exercise for you. Even as we customize GPT-3, we do not really train it. So customization or fine tuning of GPT-3 or any other language model is a very different exercise than training it. So as a human being takes 20 years to train, and after that training, you can give any kind of task to him to deliver it faster. Similarly, your language models require training, which is essentially a very rigorous process, both in terms of time taken and computation. However, once you train your models, to be able to use those models for certain specific use cases, you need only to fine tune them, and fine tuning is also something which I'll discuss with respect to GPT-3. So let's start. So what I show you here are certain use cases, from generating names to sentiment analysis to generating sentences to conversation with the AI assistant to translation, summarization, and completion. And what you see essentially at the end is a function generate prompt where you give an input and you give a required action. So this is a Python program which essentially takes your input and takes the kind of action that you are interested in, that you want GPT-3 to do, and essentially delivers that result for you. So what you see here is, as I've put here, so line 52, the action which I want GPT-3 to do in this case is translation. So when I'll get this translation done, which is the model which is actually doing the translation? As Abhilasha mentioned, there are 4 models, 4 main GPT-3 models. If you see line number 15, there you have the engine specified. The engine refers to the model. So it could be DaVinci, it could be Ada, it could be Curie, or it could be the 4th one. The prompt that you see in line 16 is essentially the function, is a return statement of the function which will take your input, and that input again would, depending on kind of requirement you have, that input would be a sentence, or it could be a phrase, it could be a set of sentences. For example, if you want to do a summary, it would be a set of sentences. Then what you have is temperature. Temperature is a very interesting thing here. So if you want to ask a question to GPT-3, and the question is where the answers you expect, there's a limited range of answers. Your answers don't really vary. They cannot really vary. For example, if you want to ask GPT-3, which is the highest mountain in the world, there will be only one answer. If you want to ask GPT-3, who is the Prime Minister of India, there will only be one answer. If you want to ask GPT-3, how is the weather, right? You can have multiple answers. So not that weather can be more than of one kind at a particular situation, but then it being a language model, even human beings, when human beings are asked that question, being in the same place, they can give slightly different answers. So when you know that there is a possibility that the prompts, that outputs generated by GPT-3 could be different and could be reasonably different, and you want them to be different, it is advised to set a higher temperature. However, when you are looking at scenarios where the variation is not desired, variation should be less, in those cases you would set up a lower temperature. Let me start the demo by first of all showing you the case which is already set in the code, and that case is of translation. Why I say so? Because as I change these cases from translation to sentiment analysis to summarization to completion, I essentially will have to relaunch Flask, as in it will take us some time, maybe a minute or so. And meanwhile, we'll discuss the use case as the background application starts its relaunch. So what you see on screen right now in line 52 is that I have specified that I want translation to be done. And if you look at line 45, translation essentially means, in this case, translate this into Spanish. It happens to be Spanish for this case, but you could mention anything. You could mention Japanese. not that you could only mention one language, you could also mention Spanish and Japanese and Hindi and some other language, and it will do that exercise for you. Please note, you in this case are not giving any input to GPT-3 in terms of it being able or to be able to help it to understand what translation means. So it's not as if you will give, if you want to translate something from Hindi to English, you will give a Hindi sentence followed by an English sentence and then another prompt followed by an English sentence and so on. You don't want to teach it. The model knows what's to be done. And if you were to think that, hey, what is the great thing about it? After all, it would be able to map what translation means. I agree. But then the entire gamut which it actually allows you, the entire gamut of things which it allows you to do is so vast. So it's not just translation. You could summarize things. You could generate sentences. You could pass customized statements as you see in line number 24. So let me start with the translation. So when you run this code, essentially, when you compile it, this is a sample. Well, this is a very, very rudimentary UI, but it's only meant for the purpose of illustration. Let me ask the audience for an input here so that I essentially take it from them, and let me see. So I'll take the first input which I get from the audience for this case. And it should be a sentence. The translation is better done on a sentence.
Probably if you could give an example, that would help. Or okay, we already have. Why did Elon Musk buy Twitter?
Sure. So why did Elon Musk buy Twitter, right? Thanks. Why me not use this example for a number of use cases? This is something which is trending, and I'll use it on not just for translation, but for maybe a conversation assistant as well. So in this case, what I do, I just specify the sentence. In this case, my desired action happens to be translation, as is specified there. And this is your translation. Now, what do you suggest? Should I just change the language, maybe? Should I change it to Japanese or French? Or should I try with a different sentence? Or should I maybe go for a different use case, maybe sentiment analysis, or maybe conversation assistant? Maybe let me go to conversation assistant because it's after all a question, right? So I'll take that privilege. So what I'll do is, since this is a question that why did he ultimately go for Twitter, what I'll do is I'll change translation to conversation with an AI assistant. It will be interesting to see what this says. Essentially, for that, I'll have to refresh, and for a while, it will actually go away before it finally comes back. I hope my file is saved. Yes. Let me see what it displays now. Otherwise, many a time it actually requires some time to work. So it's still in the same mode. So it requires some time to start, and we'll have to wait for that. So here in my file, I've changed this, I've saved it, and the Flask, if you see the status right now, this is restarting, as you see. Now it will maybe take, it may take maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute to restart. Well, it's fast, and then you will have that response there. I'm curious as to know what the reason it will provide. So as Abhilasha was mentioning, the latest model that is DaVinci, as in terms of training, was trained like in June 2021. So this is still old, but then I'm sure its training would have involved a mention of Elon Musk, certainly, because this is by OpenAI. And even if it were not by OpenAI, it would still have involved that. And let's see what kind of connotation Elon Musk has in his own organization and get output. So as it starts, I think it will still take a while to start. I'm sorry, but That is what it does. It's good it is failing because it means it's restarting. Sure. So meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll just explore other use cases. So after this, maybe I'll go for sentiment analysis, right? Because as Abhilasha was mentioning, sentiment analysis, and as Scott was mentioning, sentiment analysis, we do not often realize how powerful a use case this is. So even, well, for diverse case of industries, if you're in the insurance industry, if you have customers who are interested in your products, who want to give their feedback to their reviews, and not just insurance, not just BFSI or fintech for that matter, it could be other services, it could be even your own organization where you provide a feedback form for your management, or it could be for students, for the education sector, where students have to provide feedback for their professors. So sentiment analysis is a very important use case, and essentially you could really build very, very powerful AI-enabled SaaS platforms just on this use case. For example, if you want to, well, build a social media platform where you want to promote certain kind of influencers, but you will only promote those influencers which have some reasonable following. Now, how do you know whether an influencer has a reasonable following? One way is to essentially, of course, go for the number of followers, but then two influencers which have nearly the same number of followers are not essentially distinguishable by that metric. What you need is some other metric, and sentiment analysis is essentially one of them. So an influencer, some influencer for which the responses of the audience are generally positive, is certainly a better influencer than one for whom the influencers, the response is either is negative or it's neutral. So a case like sentiment analysis, this use case is a very, very, very powerful use case. So I'm sure that out of the 300 applications which are there in production, quite many of them would be using it either independently or in conjunction with other use cases. Let's see where our portal is. There it goes. And why did Elon buy Twitter? Nonsense. So it says there could be many reasons why Elon Musk would want to. So he is still defending Elon Musk, right? Now let me ask him another question for the same question in a different way. Mention one reason. Well, it doesn't want to reveal. Let me ask it, is it a friend of Elon Musk? Well, there is a reason why it doesn't want to go against its master, right? So, but for to ensure to be able to appreciate that this will really give you different outputs when you try different inputs. Let me give some another input, and let me take that from the audience only. Let me ask, what are the applications of GPT-3 and underwriting? So this question will be answered not by me or not by my team, but by GPT-3 itself. Well, it essentially is limiting the input, maybe because of some limit which I set in the code. Let me change it. Let me change the question. Who is president of America? My God. So this was trained in Trump days. No, but Trump had demitted office by 2020. So this should give the right answer. You see, so this is bad, and well, this essentially means that for this use case you need to fine tune GPT-3. So essentially, well, if you are looking at use cases where you expect factual answers from a language model, it will not be worthwhile to test the model till the time, well, such a model when it was trained on data which is kind of historical data. So this was trained on data till June 2021. even by that time, Trump had still, well, he was not president, so Biden had taken over, but then this is still referring to it. So what we would do in such a cases, I'll shortly show. What we would do is fine tuning of GPT-3. So we would provide our text, and that text, if at all you have some reference of Donald Trump as president of the United States in GPT-3, would essentially override that reference, provided you ensure that that reference occurs many a time in your text, and then you will have the right answer. Because of paucity of time, I want to go to other use cases. Let me try the sentiment analysis as I was referring to it. And the same thing, I'll change this conversation with the AI assistant to sentiment analysis. I'm not happy either that this AI assistant is such a great fan of Elon Musk that it doesn't want to give us a single reason as to why Musk acquired Twitter. So when I change this to sentiment analysis, I essentially have to do the same process. I need to reload the application, as in reload, relaunch Flask, restart Flask. So this is a Flask application, and let me just try it. I'm sure it will need time. So there is, but there is still hope. So I'll try with the sentence. So by the way, the logs would be deterministic anyhow, and the logs as of now show that the restart is not done fully. But let me try with another sentence meanwhile. So even if it were a conversational assistant, well, let's go to India, right? And India, what's the topic these days? India 2022. India 2022. COVID wave has receded. No special election anywhere. Well, India is not focusing on politics these days. Or rather, Indians are not focusing on politics these days. No use of asking the question, because anyway, this has started going for a restart. So I would have loved to see what answer it gives, but there we go. So somebody in the audience wants to say something. Awesome, awesome. I'll ask this question. This is a pertinent question. I shouldn't have restricted myself to India. So what do I do in that case? I'll go for the generate sentences and then ask it. Russia, Ukraine war, who will win? So let's go for sentiment analysis this time. Any sentence for which you would like to cause sentiment? So I work 40 hours a week for me to be this poor. Okay, fair. The chap is unhappy, of course, but let's see what GPT-3, how he understands it. It understands this. Well, it's still taking some more time. Meanwhile, may I have other statements from the audience? For sentiment analysis, I already have one. I work 40 hours a week for me to be this poor. So, well, maybe I'm surprised that you are in India and you're making such a statement, right? Because had it not been for India, I see. So you're saying that 40 hours a week is a positive thing, right? Right. So you see, this is quite curious. So, well, this gives makes you move to another example here. So 40 hours a week, when you look at it in the Indian context, people would say, hey man, you work only 40 hours a week, right? You should be happy. And it should be a positive sentiment, as Vishnu Rat has mentioned. However, if this were, well, a European, right, or somebody in the States, well, in certain parts of the States or in Australia, they might be grudging. They might have a grudge as to they have to work 40 hours a week. So how do you do that? Now, this makes me recall, let me first take the sentence and put it there, and then I'll talk about it. So this is negative, right? So, well, this like employees all over the world are saying, right? Maybe. So nobody wants to work even 40 hours a week, right? By the way, the employees himself saying, I work 40 hours a week and just to be this. So he wouldn't say if he was happy doing that, right? So that of course gives GPT-3 no other option. But one thing which I was trying to hint at, and I'm aware of the fact that there is less time, because, well, technically we have 6 minutes, but I want a robust Q&A for those people who are interested. What I'll do is I'll choose one use case from here, and then I'll go quickly to customization, and we'll have a Q&A. So which use case would you want me to pick up? Maybe this one is quite interesting because, well, sentiment analysis we have already done. Generate sentences would not be so much different from conversation with an AI assistant. Just that in this case, you still provide some inputs a priori. In this case, you don't have to. Translation, we have seen. Summarization, well, not a big thing, right? You provide 4 sentences, it returns you 1 sentence. Completion is again similar to generate sentences, except for the fact you don't provide a full sentence. So your sentence may be, I'm coming from India, where all people are dash, and it may feel united. Yeah, I'm coming from Asia, where you have a dictatorial, well, where one power is a dictatorial dash and it's the power. So it essentially does a fill in the blank for you. But in the interest of time, because we have to have a robust Q&A as well, what I'll do is I'll go to the generate names because this is a bit unconventional. And another reason for going for this is a kind of a customized case, right? A customized prompt. So this is different from a standard case like sentiment analysis or generate sentences. What you are seeing in line 24, you're asking GPT-3 to suggest 3 names for an animal that is a superhero. And so how will it do that? How will GPT-3 know that it has to suggest some really cool names for that particular being? As in, how will it know how to go about it, right? So, and what do you really mean by cool? So, for example, if having mentioned cat in line 26, if line in 27, if you had mentioned phenol, benzene, hydrocarbon, it would have got a different understanding, right? Maybe he would have thought that you are a chemistry professor, right? For a chemistry professor, those would be really cool names. I remember 2 of my friends having chemistry related names. One of them was named phenol, other was named space. Well, it's more related to physics, by the way, the latter. But some people might prefer it. The point is, your responses will decide the kind of response GPT-3 will produce. That is where some kind of customization based on prompts is coming. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll change the generate names feature. Sorry, pass this as the prompt as a required exercise. And what we will essentially be doing, we will be changing the creature for which we want the cool names to be created. So I've changed this, I've saved this file and I'll reload my screen. So meanwhile, it will only do sentiment analysis. But as we are anyway out of time, what I would do is as I demo that, let me take questions from the audience so that we make the best utilization of time. Any questions? There are already some in the Q&A. Let me take them up. So, hi, Abhilasha, could we go with your question first?
Yeah, Shubham. So the first question, what's the significance of the number of tokens? Like when I was explaining the model, so it takes parameters as the number. So basically the text which we are entering for which we want to do the processing. So that is counted as characters, like each character. And then average size of an English word is considered as 4 characters. So every 4 character is 1 token. So based on that, like that is the number of words it like the model can take as an input.
Thanks, Abhilasha, for that. So this next question is also well related to what you presented.
Right. So okay, Da Vinci being costlier, it is essentially. So the question is, do you mean monetary cost or GPU computing cost? And I would say like both are related, because something which needs more computing will result in a more monetary cost. Here in the monetary pricing also, there is a difference, and Da Vinci is on the the highest of all the 4, and that is because of the more computation needs of that particular model.
Sure. I'll take the last question, this 4th question, maybe 3rd or 4th question. And do we have more questions? How do I train this? Some sort of data that might be specific. Okay, we'll have those questions also, but let me see the response whether it is there, and then I will pick up the question. So somebody was mentioning text refilling as a question that GPT-3 recently released text refilling. Yes, that was done this year only, most probably in February. And in this case, I didn't happen to use it as an example. So the examples which you see here, right, are no way exhaustive. They are not at all an exhaustive set. So in the real, if you go by the real facilities, I mean the comprehensive list which GPT-3 provides, it's way larger. These are meant to be some representative examples and some examples expressing some kind of variety so that you appreciate it. Of course, GPT-3 keeps releasing new features every now and then. So in the last some 5 to 6 months, ever since November, they have really been doing a lot of good stuff. And it's only since November, by the way, that GPT-3 really became a big story. So it had been there since 2020, but because it was severely restricted, access was severely restricted to developers, for example, like Codex, right? So as far as Codex is concerned, you really even now have to be a part of the wait list. So we might do a demo on Codex later on, as in another demo on Codex, or maybe if the audience is interested, we can schedule one accordingly. But then Codex as of now is in the beta version, it's fairly restricted. However, GPT-3, because it seems that OpenAI has been able to get a positive feedback, and from their research on both the positive and negative implications of language models, particularly GPT-3, overall they have taken a decision in favor of making it more accessible to the developers, so that real-world applications are essentially based on that. Now, let me see whether I can get the right response now. So did the prompt start? Well, perhaps yes. So let me test it from my side first with some input. There we go. So now I'll take the inputs from audience. So essentially, you know what it was doing. So you asked it to get some cool names for an animal, right? And you taught what cool names meant when you specified animal as a cat, or what they meant when you specified animal as a dog. Now it asks you for another animal for which you want to generate cool names. In this case, I chose cow. Any other animal which the audience may like names to be generated for? Audience, I request for your input. Great, thanks. So this was meant for pets. I do not really know how many people keep it as pets, as a pet, but let's see. These are what you have, and they will, I'm not sure whether the meaning is appropriate for the organism, but at least there is some kind of what you may call in English a repetition of words, right, as in characters. So Platy the powerful, so PP, right? So it sounds well. So this another feature. So, and again, this is like a very customized case, right? So if you had given something else, so this is a random instruction, suggest 3 names for an animal, it's a superhero. If you had asked that, suggest some Indian politicians which are really corrupt by their state, and then, well, for one state you would have mentioned Uttar Pradesh, would have given some, well, names. Similarly, you would have mentioned Gujarat, given some names. Then maybe you give Tamil Nadu and see what the results are. Or you could have an exercise like in the United States, which places are in each state known to be the best ones. So you could give the name as California. You could give it, Texas. You could give it so some other state's name as a state name, and then you would provide some outputs, and you would be able to do it. So the reason I wanted to illustrate this particular use cases, it is quite dynamic, right? It's not something like static where you have to get sentiment analysis or you just have to generate text. It's a very powerful one, by the way. Now, we have anyway run short of time, but I'll take the questions quickly. So we see an increase in the size of models. Can it be guaranteed that higher the number of parameters and higher the amount of data bound to increase model performance, and what are the factors affect the model performance? Well, of course not. So let's just think about simple neural network models. If you want to devise a network model for, say, video analytics or image analytics or for any other exercise, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the more parameters you have and the more data you provide, it will always give you a better model, right? So you got to choose the right optimizer, you got to choose the right activation functions and so on. So let's think it this way, because what are these models after all? Don't take the analogy too strictly, but at the end of the day, you could consider more evolved models with more parameters as models which are So like human beings which are more mature. So a 10-year-old child is a model, is a smaller model than maybe a 50-year-old child. Well, not a 50-year-old, maybe say 20-year-old child, because by then your cells, I do not know what the dynamics of the brain is at that age, or maybe at 70 or 80. So I may not be categorically able to say that your brain at 80 or 70 is better than your brain at 10. But certainly if you compare your brain at age 10 and your brain at age 15, so I think the brain grows till age 15. So keeps growing till age 15. So if you take a person who is at age, say 5, and another person who is at age 15, the person at age 15 has a more advanced neural network, and he has a higher amount of data necessarily because he's seen the word. But does it always mean he'll give you a better performance? No, because come on. So his activation functions, which are essentially drivers of his response, may not be, so his mood, right, which is a kind of activation function, right? So you give some input to the chap doesn't want to listen, and he gives you a third rate output. So as in, so it's difficult to portray a real time as in one-to-one comparison neural networks. But what I want to say is, you cannot simply say that the more the number of neurons and the more the data you provide, irrespective of your activation functions, irrespective of your optimizer, irrespective of your number of layers, as in this is a one parameter, but still irrespective of other number of parameters, it will be a better form of performance. No, there is no sure sort way. If that was so, then well, that happens. So in a way, so whenever a model is released, if OpenAI releases the model, Google starts with a better model, then it forces OpenAI to go for another model, and so on. So this race has been continuing. But then what I would say is, in this race, the increase in parameters is just one factor, because if you, for example, compare the other models, like, so there are two models, at least two models. One is the Chinese model, the Baidu model, and there is one recently released by Google only. I think that was some 15 days ago, maybe some 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago. So if you compare that model with GPT-3, the Baidu one, for example, Baidu model is in no way better than GPT-3. And again, anyway, it is a very customized model, right? So not that it is customized on Chinese, but it's fairly restricted in that context. So that answer is no. How do I train? Thanks, Anmol, for this question. How do I train this? Okay, some set of data that might be specific to my use case. Oh, I'm so sorry. While taking the response of the audience, I just missed this. So maybe we can have another dedicated webinar for this. But what I would essentially need to mention is that you can essentially fine tune your GPT-3. And what would fine tuning mean is, like, if you want it to do translation, right? If you want GPT-3 to translate some sentence from Hindi to English, well, for most sentences, it would be able to get it right because it has been trained that way. But you never know. You may be coming from Uttar Pradesh. Well, again, you have different dialects in Hindi, right? So in UP, you would have Khadi Boli. In Rajasthan, you would have Marwadi in some place. In Bihar, or in other places, you would have Bhojpuri and so on, right? So, for example, if I just be very casual, right? So this was one thing which I illustrated recently as well. So, for example, if I say a sentence, "Ja tu mar ja mujhe kaam karne de," right? GPT-3 wouldn't translate as "please leave and let me work." It would translate it as "go and die, let me work." And it's no fault of it, because "ja maja" is literally that, right? Go and die. But then the Indian connotation of that is not that. A mother says to her child "ja maja" a number of times, but she never wants her to die. So for these use cases, and of course, languages are more often than not like that only. You need to customize this model. This model, which was trained on data set, which is not, well, just limited to India, but of course, the global data set needs to be fine-tuned for certain data sets. And if you want to do it, you got to have a special set of instructions. So what I may do, because there's paucity of time, in my next call, in my next webinar, I'll take it up in greater detail. But what I would like to mention is that the way to do it, you got to have your training data as a JSON line document. What happens is that if you go for base models, as Abhilasha was mentioning, then you need to provide not just simpler models, but even bigger models. You need to provide some examples because the model really needs to know, right? So in this case, you need to mention that "ja maja" means go and leave, right? It doesn't mean die. So you need to provide some kind of prompts to it. And then for for this fine-tuning, each training example will consist of a single input example and its associated output, naturally, as I just said. And here, the more data set you have, the better increase in quality, and naturally, right? The more examples you give, more it learns. So the analogy is, if at all you are from that part of India where the Hindi spoken is the chaste version of Hindi, and you go to that area where it's not so chaste, you come to UP or Bihar or some other areas, when we certain pockets of them, then the more sentences you receive, the better they are, right? To be able to do that, you got to, of course, upgrade your OpenAI, because this facility, by the way, it's in certain versions of OpenAI where, for example, you would have other supporting software. So one of the steps here is that you need to use OpenAI tools command line to be able to generate your training data. So it's not as if it's a normal, it's not a CSV file, it's a JSON-L file. And what you may have essentially is a CSV file with certain columns. To be able to convert it into a JSON file, you would require an OpenAI tools command line. And for that, you would require a specific version of OpenAI, I think one of the latest versions. And then, of course, you provide your API key because it is charged after all. OpenAI will charge you for it. And then you run this command, OpenAI API fine tune create, and you provide a name and you provide epochs as you would do for any data set, right? For any model. So that is it. Another question. So I anyway answered that it released text filling. Any idea how it works? Well, I need to do more reading on this. So this has been released quite recently. I think it was not released earlier than Feb, and maybe it was released in March. So I did use that facility, but on how it does it, right? So you see, if you look at the let me take a wild guess. So if you look at the GPT series, what does that do? It essentially looks at the left context, or I mean, it's a transformer based model, right? So it uses attention. So in this case, it just uses the left context to be able to understand some text and then fill up the blank. So GPT-3 in that case is, in this case for text filling, is more like BERT, is behaving more like BERT. BERT has a tendency, so BERT is known as the fill in the blank model, right? You give a sentence, you omit some word, and based on the left context and the right context, it will fill in the blank. GPT-3 or GPT-2 doesn't have the luxury of the left context, but it does the task of sequence generation by looking at, so it doesn't have the luxury of right context, but it does the task of sequence generation by looking at the left context. So I believe, I mean, this is a hunch. Again, this needs to be qualified with aggressive, I would say, with rock solid analysis. But the hunch is that since it is anyway a model which is looking at the left context, and anyway, when it generates sentences, it uses that feature as in of extrapolation, then isn't it very obvious, maybe to some extent, right? At least that it would be able to fill in your blanks to rather correct your statements. What's the next question? Anyway, I got it. So what type of support can we get for Indic language by GPT-3? But it's a very good question. So one of the recent things which I tried with GPT-3, and I was not quite sure whether this could really work. So I was testing different transformers like BERT and GPT-3 on Indian languages, and Hindi was one of them. And I realized that there is a good support. So in the sense that, for example, when I provided inputs, initially I was even skeptic whether it would be able to translate Hindi to English. And I really tried to give difficult sentences, and it was able to. So, and I think OpenAI recognizes that India has a place, right? So, I mean, they cannot ignore languages of India. In terms of if the question is, if you have a problem around Hindi, or if you want to, do some fine tuning and some very specific kind of fine tuning, which may require some kind of response from their support team, how much would they be able to support? So my experience with OpenAI supporters, they are very active. So they mention on their website that they'll respond within 2 days, but they actually respond within 2 hours. That's the wonder. But in this particular case, I have not approached them for this particular use case for Hindi translation, maybe because my requirements were satisfied very much by GPT-3. And but I feel, given the kind of customer response they have, even if they are not aware, if they don't have a required resource, they'll let you know. Can GPT-3 be used for natural language generation, say sports commentary from live scores? Well, sir, this was something which we have been talking about anyhow, right? So GPT-3 is used for NLG. So NLG is your natural language generation. Didn't I show you 2 use cases? One is, maybe I didn't pass them as prompts, but you have a generate sentences use case and a completion use case. So rather than saying whether it can be used, rather than answering the question that way, I would say GPT-3 is meant for that. So, for a teacher, if you ask a question, would she teach? The answer is not only will she teach, she is meant to teach, right? So GPT-3 is meant to generate text. It's after all a sequence generator. Of course, it will do that. And as I think, as I remember, as Scott and Abhilasha were mentioning, sports is a very big area where you can use GPT-3 for doing commentary. And in fact, if you look at articles online, there are interviews where GPT-3 was interviewed and it gave some really fantastic responses. So you obviously have it there. So it is meant for it. So there, within NLP, you have two two things. You have natural, so you have NLP, which is natural language processing, but you can break it into two parts. So well, you have two other themes around it, which is NLU, which is natural language understanding, and then there is NLG, which is natural language generation. Now you can't do NLG without doing NLU, right? Because if you don't understand the language, what will you generate next? It's like me asking you to generate more Telugu without you knowing Telugu. You can't do it, right? It's a precursor. So you need to know, so it of course does NLG, but it requires NLU, which is anyway taken care because it's a transformer based model. So these were the questions. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I think there are a few questions in the chat. If you can have a look, like.
As in were they raised just now? Chat. Okay, let me go there. How it works for static images? Can I make text to UI? Can I make, what does making text to UI mean? So it essentially, does it mean that you would take a snapshot of text? So I have this text and I take a snapshot of it. Well, I didn't try it for it, but maybe in our next section when I'll talk about codecs, right? At least the plan is that way. Then since codecs is quite famous, if not for this, for similar use cases where you essentially ask it to write code and do things for you. So what codecs might do for you is you might ask codecs to write a piece of code which takes an image as an input and converts into text, or which takes the text in an image and converts, as you mentioned, it to a UI. So it's not something which, I'm not sure whether it's something which you can pass in a prompt and get the image or text converted the way you want, but certainly codecs will give you the feature whereby you can get that piece of code generated. Can we train certain layers of GPT-3 or is it fully black boxed? Well, I tried doing that, but I ended up wasting my time. And what I realized is I limit myself better to fine tuning it. In fact, fine tuning solves my requirement anyhow, right? So if the question is can, well, if you if you anyway have that level of computational power, right, and resources, nobody in the world prevents you from doing that. But most people wouldn't do it. So organizations like Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, and so on, they have dedicated teams and dedicated servers, I would say, which work on that. And we as individuals may not be doing it, but certainly we can do fine tuning. And for our use cases, fine tuning is actually what matters. Any more questions? Pranshu, I think we are good. Prashi and
Yeah,
Pranshu.
okay. Well, that was certainly very illuminating, to be very honest, and very interesting.
Thanks, Prachi.
Thank you, Shubham. Thank you, Abhilasha. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining. But before we sign off for today, I wanted to let you guys know that we are having an interesting lineup of webinars next month, which includes one on transforming data pipelines using Airbyte with DBT. So you will be receiving invites to this webinar as well. So I hope to see you then. And thank you